create a really atmospheric and jarring and shattering kind of he would constantly say that, that you should think of the, like, in the Dollarhide character with the shattering of the glass, and that character's whole MO with what he was into, and watching the film over and over before we really started working on the music and talking about it together, Bruce and I, that's how we kind of fell into, like, that particular sound. And it really encompassed the Red sound, with Bruce's keyboards and my guitar work and combined to get the metallic, atmospheric kind of sound.
Michael somehow heard that I was the new hot guy in town, and since he always wanted to have the latest, greatest, music, he just hired me. And he hired me specifically to do Manhunter, but he also had this other films, and he signed me to do both films. I was supposed to do Manhunter first, but as it turned out, with production delays on Manhunter, Band of the Hand wound up being first in line, and so I started doing the music. Or not started. I did all the music for Band of the Hand, and then waited, hoping that he'd still think that I was the new greatest guy in town to do Manhunter, and which at that time was named Red Dragon. It hadn't been called Manhunter yet. They hadn't changed the name. So shortly thereafter, Manhunter was ready for music, and I went to work on that. He had a vision of how the music was supposed to sound, and he told me what he wanted, and I gave him hopefully I gave him what he needed, and I don't think that I don't remember exactly if he said he wanted it to be dark or something, but of course every director describes the music that they want in some terms, usually not in very good musical terms either. So as a composer, I have to translate in my head what the director really means. I had one director, it wasn't Michael Mann, but I had one director who actually was watching a film with me, and he said to me, Michel, he said, you see this film here, this scene here, I see this as a green scene. I said, a green scene? He says, yeah, you know what I mean. And I thought to myself, no, I don't know what you mean. And then we went a little farther. He said, now this scene is more purple. So this guy didn't know anything about music, and he only knew colors. And so his description of music was in colors, and I was supposed to translate that. It was bizarre, but I mean, that's sort of an example of what I have to go through sometimes with directors on movies. Some sort of contemporary manner that he could play in different ways with different orchestrations whenever they were talking together, or they were so forth and so on. When they were in scenes together. And so I wrote a theme, and I did several versions of it, faster, slower, and he came into the studio and listened to it, and he loved it, and he said, okay, he said, give me this, and I want a rock version of it. I want a moody blues sounding version of it, et cetera, et cetera. I want a delicate version of it, and so rather than score directly to film, I did the themes, and then once he listened to the themes and he said, oh yeah, that's going to go great in this scene, then I would literally go back to my own music and start cutting it and editing it digitally to fit, to time it to the scene. So that was how I approached working with him. He was I would do music, he would listen to it, he would okay it or reject it, and then I would go forward and we'd fit it, because they kept on changing the timing on the scenes. I couldn't write to a scene because he was editing up until like 2 days before it was released. They were still cutting film, you know.
Really clear ideas as far as what he was looking for with the score. He would talk about different things like metallic, shattered glass, talk about things like the electric prunes, I Had Too Much to Dream, the production and sound of a record like that, as well as things like some of the Pink Floyd tracks, like the keyboard sounds. So he was pretty specific of what he wanted. He also, at that point, was on board with a couple of Shriekback tracks that he ended up using in the film, and was asking us to approach a similar kind of atmospheric kind of quality to the score that they have in their music. So it really helped in terms of working with him. Plus, he's such a music enthusiast from all the work that he does. Anybody that knows his work, music is such a big part of it. So it was really easy to work with him.
Yeah, we were aware that he was using some of our tunes in the TV series Miami Vice, where Shriekback, with their atavistic and sometimes quite obscure concerns, were being wheeled out for things like chasing a coke baron in a motorboat around the harbour. It always seemed kind of unintentionally funny, really. So we weren't really taking it all that seriously. We were being used in various TV things at the time. So that was just, yeah, as we saw it, just another one of those things that meant the blind girl. And well, the joke we had at the time was that if you had sort of two conventionally beautiful, untraumatized young people having good old-fashioned exciting sex with each other, you might have got there were like a million 80s bands you could have got in to provide the soundtrack to that. But you know, you've got a blind girl being seduced or seducing a very twisted serial killer. Who are you going to call? It's Shriekback, of course. You know. But I think there's a real point under that, which is that the serial killer is offered redemption in this scene. You know, there is a possibility that his whole game plan, which is to go out and transform himself into William Blake's monster, and by massacring whole families and sexually abusing them, maybe he doesn't have to do that. Maybe he is lovable. Maybe he is a viable human being who could be loved by another human being. Maybe that's possible. And there's a little glimmer in that scene in which that possibility is kind of offered, or apparently offered. And our piece of music, This Big Hush, was about a relationship where there is much beauty in that relationship, but it's going to be difficult, and there is a dark side to it, most definitely. So yeah, that's that congruence of things that are apparently contradictory. There's love and there is destruction, and they don't necessarily exist in different universes. Sometimes they're very close together, and they're almost indistinguishable sometimes. And I think that tune of ours does express that, and it adds an atmosphere to that scene that it otherwise wouldn't have.
We had worked out it was his basic demo, and then we just sort of fleshed it out. And when he sang it, I remember being in the room with him, and back then, literally, sort of allowing myself to try to experience. It was so real when he sang it. It's this personal story with his father and everything like that. That since has been relayed to me, and he relayed to me back then. So I was just like, we're really in a studio. We were recording with the producer was Chris Tangarides, who had done Judas Priest and all these Yngwie and heavy metal people, and so I really remember doing the vocal, him doing the vocal, and just me being like 4 feet away, and just kind of trying to get drawn up into it. And he wanted me in there at the time. I can remember, like, yeah, And so I can just remember that. And so that, hopefully that all kind of came out. I'm experiencing that too, the emotion and everything. That's not just a song, but it was a pretty high point for that time. And I think that that's another reason why Michael Mann probably wanted it. It's like, obviously that you know, the A, G, B minor, it's almost like classic chord progression that he came up with. And then I just put some fuzz tone on it and a little whammy bar. And so I think that I love the simplicity of the song too. And I think that you can understand the chorus, as strong as I am, you can understand that. Of like, it's such a great line. It's such a great line. And I can see why it would appeal to him when he was making that film, to get a point across in that film.
Stewart. And then we were working on the film. And at one point we had Roger Nichols, the engineer that works with Steely Dan, tremendous engineer, come in and do a couple things with us. And it was interesting because at different points, the guys like in Cooper's band that were hanging out, we cut this one piece that's it's available somewhere as a stereo track called Discovery, but Michael ended up using a Rubini cue, and the track that we cut was like really more like a rock kind of a thing. It was like real spacious, nice keyboards, really takes off and some guitar things, but it ended up not being used. But the funny part about it was the guys from Cooper's band would come in and out while we were working on this stuff all the time. And when they heard that track, they thought it was really a cool track just because of the feel of it and the sounds on it and all. And then they came back and they found out that it wasn't being used. And these guys were like, you know, they were like us, they were like rockers, but they couldn't deal with the thing of like, who's this guy telling you this stuff? This is rock and roll, man. What the hell is with this? What are you guys putting up with this kind of shit for? But we were totally into the whole thing, what he was trying to do with the film. So we were coming at it from a totally different direction, and these guys were just coming in and out, hearing bits of it, and, you know, but they couldn't, like, get into the thing of, like, you know, why wasn't this being used? Because they were coming from, like, you know, the band kind of thing, and the band thing is, like, you know, that's their thing. And they weren't really getting the whole film part of it, that we were there as a part of the whole thing. We weren't, it wasn't, like, our party, really. So that was like a cool part. And then Michael Mann always had different people coming through. At one point, when we were working on a piece, he comes into the studio and he's got Del Shannon with him. And it's a guitar. I was using it to like write like different parts as we were going along. And just gives Del the guitar. He goes out and does a rip-roaring version of Runaway. And then they decide to use that for the theme song for Crime Story on NBC. And it was just like different writers, screenwriters, and actors coming by. And it was interesting from that standpoint, you know. The New York thing was more like an insular kind of thing because we were there with our engineer, Dominic, who'd like work with the Stones and Brian Ferry and a lot of really great rock people. And it was just more of us just like totally focused on the music in the studio. We did one cool thing on that Joggers cue that one of the engineers at the studio were working on it. They'd acquired a flanging unit from Electric Ladyland, one of the ones like Hendrix was using, and we used it on that track, Joggers Stakeout, and it just like has this really atmospheric movement to it. It's like, you know, old school kind of a, you know, noise kind of maker, but it just, for the track, it works perfectly. Just like all the little nuances of stuff like that, you know, and like when like Mann came by in New York and he heard the Leeds house and he was like really happy the way it turned out, and then just took it and then started that. I think that gave him like having a really good copy of it, like, because before he was just working from cassettes, we were shipping to him overnight because there wasn't the internet then. So it was a totally different way of doing it. Just every night as we worked up ideas, we would send it out FedEx to him, and then he'd call up and the next day and it'd be wrong, you got it all wrong, you know. He's real direct. That was the thing. 11 to 2 mixing, you know, your ears get kind of burned. I said, Michael, I'm like burned. My ears are burned at this point. I don't think it would be fair to you or to Rubini to be mixing his track and giving any kind of input at this point. And he's like, you know, hey, I've been up all, you know, just putting as much time as you guys. So we ended up doing it.
I was actually not acquainted with Michael Mann specifically. We had seen sort of the beginning of his work in the Miami Vice stuff. Now, at that time, I was with MCA Universal as an artist, and my band Red 7 at that time had just finished recording an album in England with Mike Rutherford from Genesis. And we had just completed the record, came back to the States, and Kathy Nelson from MCA, who was the person in charge of finding, placing your songs in film, came to us and said, go take a look at this roughs of this film. And we looked at it, and this looked really interesting. And especially knowing how Michael Mann was really at the forefront at that time of wedding popular music with his film. It was an exciting opportunity. We could see that he was, in the Miami Vice series, for example, that he was really using a lot of music that would never before have found its way into a film and placing it in a relationship of importance in the film as opposed to just being background music. So we were very pleased when he was interested in Heartbeat. Then it took a little bit more of a path. Heartbeat had to be altered. So I spent an evening, really great evening, late night in the studio with him and adding some parts to some keyboard parts to make, and sort of do it in more of the direction of the Miami Vice music, the sort of droning synthesizer thing. We added that, and so then he was very pleased with it. Never having met him, my wife came. This was in a studio owned by Giorgio Moroder. Now, a little background on that is all these Donna Summer disco hits were made in the studio. Giorgio Moroder was the producer. And we had use of the studio for the second Red 7 album we were starting to record at that time. So we came into the studio late at night, maybe 1 o'clock in the morning, and there Michael Mann was there. And I came in with my wife. And one thing I always wanted to comment and thank him for was that he was such a gentle and caring individual. The person he wanted to talk to was my wife. And he wanted to discuss with her the name of the film. He was not sure about it. He liked Red Dragon, but they couldn't use it because they didn't want the movie to appear to be a kung fu movie, and so forth and so on. So first thing he did was had a long conversation with my wife about the title. Was Manhunter going to be okay? And they talked about it. And meanwhile, I'm trying to figure out how to operate the synthesizer I'd never used. And so I was struck with his open and kind attitude right off the bat, and which, talking to someone he never knew, my wife, who was not really involved creatively in this process, bringing her into the process said a lot about him as an individual. I felt that he would say what was on his mind with no problem, and I would accept whatever he had to say in the spirit of, let's make a great final product. So I think that I would love to work with him again. I would, because I think he's someone who is underappreciated overall because of people's impression that he is so wedded to the 80s. When actually, if you look at some of his films like Heat, very good movie, Heat. I think people need to appreciate him a little bit more, and give him more opportunity now. What would he do now? That's why I would like to see where he would take his sensibility. To what place would he take that now in 2015, 2016?
He really changed like the way I do a lot of things in terms of you only have so much time and you got to work 110% all the time. And being around him, his work ethic is totally infectious. It's totally infectious. I mean, you feel like you're dogging it if you're not working at that 110%. It was a learning. And as far as mixing stuff, his mixing, being a film mixer, is totally different than doing rock and roll, because he's hearing stuff in a different way. Like when we mix things with him, he'll take something and make it so predominant that you would never even think of doing it. But in terms of that scene, it makes perfect sense. So he was always pushing the thing. We were so into the British thing, working with British directors, producers and engineers. We'd gotten into the real technical stuff, doing a lot of technology within the stuff and the music. And he kept saying, man, you guys need to go back to the organic kind of sound, because he was always into this thing about our music as a moving piece later on in the 80s, like the Doors kind of thing. Music that had a darkness to it and a passion, and that's what kind of drew him to the band's sound. And he was always pushing the organic thing, don't put too much stuff in it, don't worry about doing all this kind of technology, and just get the feel and lay it down and do it. And after that, we kind of got more back into doing recording that way, because that's how it initially started out. So it was learned a lot from him.
In a way, like the central kind of focus of Manhunter is this idea of the detective who's got so much serial killer in him. He's good at hunting down serial killers, but in order to be effective at that, he has to get in touch with that side of him that is a psychopath. So in other words, the good guy is the bad guy.
And directed were very specific to that era, but also a very wonderful example of how film was made then. I think that a lot of subsequent films are taken from this in many different aspects, whether it be the lighting or the cinematography, and it was sort of a basis of a lot of films that came thereafter. I think it was, in my opinion, of the Lecter series of films, it was by far and away the best. You can't take away Anthony Hopkins' contribution to Silence of the Lambs, magnificent, but as an overall film, I think this is a very good film. I enjoy the film.